Evil Dead, the classic horror movie by Sam Raimi. To make this movie on a low budget, I believe one of the key aspects of how this movie got made and be successful was the one location. Get a bunch of kids, throw them in a cabin, and then hack them up. Today I'm going to talk about Evil Dead and other classic micro-budget, one-location movies. And you can utilize techniques that they used to create a micro-budget masterpiece.
One thing about no-budget movies that actually got me really inspired to make movies is when I've seen movies like Clerks, Evil Dead, Blair Witch Project, they seem doable. And that sounds weird because they're great movies, but they seemed attainable as a no-budget filmmaker. And you could do it on the cheap because of locations and just the way it was shot. One of the easiest things that can really kill your no-budget or low-budget movie is having way too many locations. The key is keeping it very contained. A lot of people think of this as very limiting. I've always had this thought that limitations are actually the filmmaker's or artist's greatest tool. When you can just throw money at anything, you lose that weird thought that you had or this weird idea on set that you had to kind of like make something work. It makes you think on your feet, and I think you end up with something a little more real, even in a goofy like horror movie like Evil Dead. The original Friday the 13th had a very similar idea. Get a bunch of kids, put them in one location and kind of hack them up. And that's kind of the formula of that classic 80s slasher movie, really. Why is a limited location important? Well, on a big budget movie, locations are huge, and any kind of location change is a huge task. You have to move a bunch of trucks. You have to, maybe drive across town, a whole different country sometimes. All this stuff like really adds up. Your entire production's moving. Your production team, all the actors. So it just takes a lot of time, and like they say, time is money, especially on a set. There's also some classic self-contained one location, no budget, micro budget movies like Clerks, which I'm again, huge fan of Clerks. Huge fan of Kevin Smith and what he did with that movie. He was inspired by kind of just, hey, he worked at a convenience store. What about a movie about a convenience store? And just set it in the place where he worked. And that's super cheap location. I'm pretty sure he didn't pay any money for it other than he had to do it on off hours at night, which is super cool. But again, that really freed him up to like actually come up with some good ideas, good script, and just set it in a convenience store. You think of movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, pretty much the whole movie is set in a old house. Probably like one of the biggest keys to a successful no-budget movie, and I say that in quotations because that's very subjective on what even success is. For me, it's always been a very, very key part of making a no-budget script or concept or finally finishing the movie is a super contained location. Most no-budget movies or low-budget movies have to be done very, very quickly. So time is of the essence. So on a big budget movie, you're talking a few months shooting, but in a micro-budget, no-budget movie, you gotta get that thing done. A few weeks at max. I've worked on a few micro-budget, low-budget TV movies where it wasn't my movie necessarily, but I was involved with the shooting, and we had 10 days. 10 days was actually probably one of the longer ones. I believe most of them were shot in about 8 days with a few days of pickups with a very small crew like me and a few of the, post people. Blair Witch Project was also a huge inspiration of mine. That was a one location like this where you got a forest and you just let your actors play. It was very improv, but overall they think they shot that thing for like 20 grand. Overall, very gritty, no budget movie. A lot of it was shot on high 8, a camera that I ended up buying, a high 8 camera around that time. I would actually probably put Blair Witch as like the number one, hey, I can do this, because it just looked so but in a good way. And no one can beat the marketing of Blair Witch. And I'll dive into that more on the marketing end of things probably later in this series on how to market a no-budget movie, but we'll be deep diving into Blair Witch. It was a game changer when it came to early internet and just the hype they built up by just having a very rudimentary website. And I actually have a really exciting idea. I'm gonna make a feature film this year, and it's going to be no budget. I want to frame this project, give you like really consistent updates. My plan is 50 weeks, 52 weeks in a year. And so by the time January rolls around 2027, I'll have a feature film to show you guys. But my framing device is going to be no budget movies of the past that I actually dig. I'm at like day 0. I have like a couple kernels of ideas, but I'm thinking in terms of one location, and I'm walking up to the lake here, and am I gonna make a lake movie based around a lake? I could just literally walk up from my house to this lake with very little hassle. I always thought this location here was super cool. I like this little dock here. Again, you could probably run and gun this pretty easily, and that's what I'm talking about. It's gonna be I'm doing this run and gun. I've been hesitant to shoot in places sometimes just because, like, I don't know, logistics, or if I'm allowed to do it. And I feel like that's kind of like I don't know, being older now, I think I should embrace more of this run and gun. I'm actually super inspired by my buddy Kyle, who just run and gunned some in Long Beach, made a movie. And his movie's great, and he just did it. Yeah, he's actually an inspiring guy. I have a huge soft spot for no budget, micro budget people who don't have the resources. They don't have really anything, to be honest. And like, I feel like I'm in that boat too. Lake movie, maybe? I don't know. I think some kids do camp here. At least I'd like to think that they do. But it's kind of a neat little spot, a little camping spot here. Now this totally reminds me of like a Friday the 13th and Evil Dead. It's kind of like, it's a good, yeah, there's a little fire here. Maybe they just hang out for the night. Oh, there's actually yeah, looks like a little bit of actually there's a tent. There's like a canoe right there. Limit your location to like one area. Now, I don't know if I'm gonna necessarily use this lake area, but it's definitely always been in the back of my head. Going with a contained location saves you a ton of headaches, moving people around, and saves a ton of money. Thinking about this in the script stage is huge, massive. So that's kind of where my brain is at right now, thinking of a very limited location, contained location, something I can really utilize. Like, I have a house I could use, although people live in a house. It's always really tough working with your own house because you have like people that live in it as well. It's not just you. You can't be a selfish dog's piss in here. So I'm not thinking necessarily a house, but I do have it if I have to use like one little room, use my office. The limited location really helps you sort of really compartmentalize your movie. Early on in your career, or when you start writing movies, you're always thinking super big. At least I did, making zombie movies and all these big, huge epics. And really, you don't have enough money to do that. So keep it small. So this is my series. It's going to be about my favorite no-budget movies and what I've learned from them, what can be taken away from them, hopefully help you too make your no-budget movie. I'm a big, absolute, huge, massive fan of the no-budget movie, the $1,000 movie. Now, it might sound super silly, but my first kind of real, when I finished a movie called The Wrong People in 2017, first one I was like super proud of, made a zombie movie that was terrible. That's beyond the point. If you want to see more of that, it's in my channel. But one of the first comments I got, I think it was a review or something, I don't remember. And I remember being really bummed about it, but the guy's like, oh, can you make a movie for $500? Because that was kind of what we spent on Wrong People. And he's like, sure, but what's the point? And I'm like, some of these people don't understand that $500 was like a film school, or at least a semester of a film school. For me, I learned a ton on making that movie. It took us a couple of years to completely finish the movie. And to say it's like perfect, absolutely not. It has tons of flaws. We completely redid the dialogue in post, terribly as well, not like any professional post ADR house. And it was a mistake. And I say that from now, and I go back to the raw files, and I kind of want to clean it up just using the raw on-camera audio. It would have been better than the dubbed, but it's out there. It's on YouTube. It has over 100,000 views. since it was released. I think it's closing in on like 150, I believe, something like that, which is like, 150,000 less views than if we hadn't completed it and put it on YouTube, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of naysayers about, what's the point of a $500 movie, $1,000 movie? And I really fight against that with all my being. I think if you can make a movie for $1,000, just go and do it. There's a guy that I follow on YouTube. He's actually quite successful, even in the traditional terms, over 1 million or 2 subscribers on YouTube, named Joel Haver, and he makes these tiny, cheap movies. I'm sure he's spending not more than a couple $1,000, and he just makes it with some friends, and they're like mostly character driven, which I'm super into as well. And that's kind of where I'm leaning actually with my idea, like a 2-character movie, 2 to 3 characters. Yeah, I'm super inspired by Joel Haver and what he's doing, and the challenge is always finding that audience. And I think that's the hugest part of filmmaking, or really any art nowadays, is finding that audience to actually watch your stuff consistently. And that's it's just always a battle. Talent and skill and that all that kind of stuff is, you get to a certain point with that, but then you still need to market yourself, and which is kind of like the new way of doing it. It's unfortunate maybe, or it's something that you just have to learn to embrace, which that's all I have. It's all I can do is, promote, market in a way that feels good for me. But I definitely don't do as much as I should. I really appreciate you guys following along, and hit the subscribe button if you want to see a journey of making a micro budget, no budget feature in 2026. That's my goal.